The marriage summit on Velthra Prime was the most spectacular event in the known galaxy. The grand ballroom stretched so vast that you couldn't see from one end to the other. Crystal chandeliers the size of small ships hung from the ceiling, each one containing captured starlight that cast rainbow patterns across the polished floors. The walls were made of transparent aluminum, giving everyone a view of the planet's 3 moons rising in perfect alignment. It happened only once a year, and that's when they held the summit. Hundreds of alien species filled the space. There were the tall, elegant Valorians with their silver skin that seemed to glow. The stocky Grundan delegates with their multiple arms gesturing as they spoke. The floating Aerith whose bodies were made of condensed gas held together by energy fields. Royalty from 300 different worlds, all dressed in their finest, all searching for the same thing. The perfect match. The perfect alliance. The perfect way to strengthen their empires through marriage. Music filled the air, a blend of sounds from different worlds that somehow worked together. Servers moved through the crowd carrying drinks and food from across the galaxy. Laughter echoed. Conversations buzzed with excitement. Deals were being made. Futures were being written. Princess Lyria stood on the balcony outside, separated from all of it by a wall of glass. She wore a gown made from fabric that shifted colors with her emotions. Right now it was a dull gray. The color of sadness. The color of resignation. This was her 5th summit. 5 years she'd been coming to these events. 5 years of hope slowly dying. 5 years of watching every other royal in attendance find their matches while she remained alone. She pressed her hand against the glass and watched a young Valerian princess laughing with a Grundan prince. They looked happy. Excited about their future together. Last year, that same Valerian princess had been alone like Lyria. Now she'd found someone. Another success story to add to the summit's long history. Everyone found someone eventually. Everyone except Lyria. The problem wasn't her appearance. Calthine were considered beautiful by galactic standards. Her people had delicate features, large eyes that changed color with the light, and graceful movements that made them seem like they were always dancing. Lyria had inherited her mother's looks and her father's strength. She should have had suitors lining up. But she didn't. Because of one simple fact that outweighed everything else. Calthine only lived 40 years. 40 short years compared to the 200, 300, sometimes 500 years that most other species enjoyed. It was a cruel joke of biology. Her people aged normally for the first 20 years of life, then seemed to stay young and healthy for another 15. But then decline came fast. By 35, Calthine started showing their age. By 40, almost all of them were gone. Medical science couldn't fix it. Researchers had tried for centuries. The Calthine biology simply burned too bright, too fast. Like candles that gave beautiful light but consumed themselves quickly. Who wanted to marry someone who'd be gone in 20 years? Who wanted to build an alliance that would dissolve before it barely began? Who wanted to invest time, effort, and emotion into a spouse who'd leave them still young and alone? The answer, as Lyria had learned painfully over 5 years, was absolutely no one. Inside the ballroom, she could see her father. Emperor Van stood near the refreshment tables, talking with another ruler. His posture was slumped. Defeated. He'd stopped trying to arrange meetings for Lyria 2 summits ago. What was the point? Every conversation ended the same way. Interest. Questions about the Calthine Empire's wealth and resources. Then someone would mention lifespans. The interest would vanish like smoke. Polite excuses would follow. Perhaps another time. We'll consider it. Let's stay in touch. All meaning the same thing. No. Lyria had memorized every excuse. She'd heard them all. Our genetics aren't compatible. Translation. You'll die too soon. The timing isn't right. Translation. Why bother? We're exploring other options. Translation. Literally anyone else. But she didn't. Because of one simple fact that outweighed everything else. Calthine only lived 40 years. 40 short years compared to the 200, 300, sometimes 500 years that most other species enjoyed. It was a cruel joke of biology. Her people aged normally for the first 20 years of life, then seemed to stay young and healthy for another 15. But then decline came fast. By 35, Calthine started showing their age. By 40, almost all of them were gone. Medical science couldn't fix it. Researchers had tried for centuries. The Calthine biology simply burned too bright, too fast. Like candles that gave beautiful light but consumed themselves quickly. Who wanted to marry someone who'd be gone in 20 years? Who wanted to build an alliance that would dissolve before it barely began? Who wanted to invest time, effort, and emotion into a spouse who'd leave them still young and alone? The answer, as Lyria had learned painfully over 5 years, was absolutely no one. Inside the ballroom, she could see her father. Emperor Van stood near the refreshment tables, talking with another ruler. His posture was slumped. Defeated. He'd stopped trying to arrange meetings for Lyria 2 summits ago. What was the point? Every conversation ended the same way. Interest. Questions about the Calthene Empire's wealth and resources. Then someone would mention lifespans. The interest would vanish like smoke. Polite excuses would follow. Perhaps another time. We'll consider it. Let's stay in touch. All meaning the same thing. No. Lyria had memorized every excuse. She'd heard them all. Our genetics aren't compatible. Translation. You'll die too soon. The timing isn't right. Translation. Why bother? We're exploring other options. Translation. Literally anyone else. The worst part wasn't the rejections themselves. It was watching people's faces change when they learned the truth. That moment when interest turned to pity. When possibility turned to impossibility. When she went from being a princess to being a problem with no solution. A Thoran prince approached her father inside. Lyria watched hopefully through the glass. The Thorans were a diplomatic species, known for their fairness and open-mindedness. Maybe this one would be different. Maybe he'd see past the numbers to the person underneath. Her father gestured toward the balcony. Toward Lyria. The prince turned to look. For a moment, their eyes met through the glass. Lyria tried to smile. Tried to look confident and princess-like. The prince turned away. He said something to her father. Even without hearing the words, Lyria knew what he was saying. She'd seen that conversation enough times to read lips across a crowded room. Her father's shoulders slumped further. The prince walked away. Another rejection. Another door closed. Lyria turned away from the glass. She couldn't watch anymore. Couldn't stand there and witness her father's disappointment. Couldn't bear another moment of being the unwanted princess at a party full of happy couples. Music swelled inside the ballroom. Dancing was starting. That meant more mingling. More opportunities for royals to meet and connect. More chances for Lyria to stand in corners being politely ignored. She should go inside. Show her face. Maintain the dignity expected of a princess. Smile through the pain like she'd been taught. Never let them see how much it hurt. But she couldn't. Not tonight. Not after watching that Thoran prince walk away without even speaking to her first. Lyria ran. Down the fancy corridor with its expensive art and perfect lighting. Past surprised guards who started to follow but were too slow. She found a service elevator, the kind staff used to move between levels without being seen by guests. She slapped the button and dove inside as doors opened. Ground level, she gasped at the controls. Anywhere. Just down. The elevator dropped fast, leaving her stomach somewhere up near the summit level. It opened in a place she'd never seen before. Dark corridors. Harsh lighting. The sound of machinery humming. This was the mechanical district. The working guts of the station that kept everything running while nobles danced above. Lyria stumbled out of the elevator into an alley between 2 large buildings. The air smelled like oil and metal and hard work. So different from the perfumed atmosphere of the summit. She collapsed against a wall, her fancy gown getting dirty, her carefully arranged hair coming loose. Then she cried. Really cried. Not the delicate tears a princess was supposed to shed in private. Huge, body-shaking sobs that came from somewhere deep inside. 5 years of rejection. 5 years of being judged on something she couldn't control. 5 years of loneliness in crowded rooms. No one wants me, she whispered to the empty alley. Her voice echoed off the metal walls. No one will ever want me. That's a pretty sad thing to say. Lyria's head snapped up. A human stood at the alley entrance. Young, maybe mid-20s by human standards. He wore work coveralls stained with grease and oil. Toolkit in one hand. Brown hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. Kind eyes that held concern instead of pity. Sorry, he said, raising his free hand. Didn't mean to sneak up on you. I work down here. Was heading back to my shop when I heard someone crying. He took a small step closer, moving carefully like you would around something wounded. You okay? Lyria stared at him. He didn't recognize her. Had no idea she was Princess Lyria of the Calthene Empire. He just saw someone in pain. Someone who needed help. When was the last time anyone had looked at her without knowing who she was first? No, Lyria said honestly, her voice rough from crying. I'm not okay. The human looked around the alley, then at her fancy dress, then back at her face. He seemed to make a decision. He walked over and sat down on the ground about 6 feet away. Close enough to talk. Far enough to not be threatening. You want to talk about it? He asked simply. And for the first time in 5 years, Lyria did. His name was Tyler Brooks and he was the most ordinary person Lyria had ever met. He fixed ship engines for a living. Spent 12 hours a day crawling through tight spaces with tools and diagnostic equipment. His hands were permanently stained with grease no matter how much he scrubbed them. He lived in a tiny apartment 3 levels down from where they sat today. He ate simple food. Lived a simple life. Had simple dreams of maybe opening his own repair shop someday. He had absolutely no idea he was sitting in a dirty alley talking to Princess Lyria of the Calthene Empire. And that made him perfect. For the first time in 5 years, Lyria talked to someone who didn't know who she was. Someone who wasn't calculating political advantages or genetic compatibility. Someone who just listened. She told him everything. About the marriage summit happening high above them where nobles and royalty mingled in their expensive clothes under their expensive lights. About how these summits were supposed to forge alliances between worlds through carefully arranged marriages. About how she'd attended 5 of them now and watched everyone else find matches while she stood alone. Tyler sat quietly, occasionally nodding, his expression serious as he absorbed what she was saying. She explained about the Calthene lifespan. How her people only lived 40 years compared to the hundreds of years most other species enjoyed. How that single fact made her unmarriageable in the eyes of galactic society. How potential suitors would show interest until they learned the truth, then find excuses to walk away. It's basic math, Lyria said, her voice bitter. Why marry someone who'll be dead in 20 years when you could marry someone who'll be with you for 200? Why form an alliance that will dissolve before it's barely begun? I'm not a good investment. I'm a liability with an expiration date. She talked about watching the same Valyrian princess who'd been alone last year now dancing happily with her new match. About seeing species she'd never even heard of finding partners while she remained invisible. About the look on her father's face each time another potential suitor walked away. 5 years, Lyria whispered. 5 years of being told I'm not worth the trouble. 5 years of being judged for something I can't control. 5 years of feeling like I'm defective somehow. When she finally ran out of words, Tyler sat there for a moment in silence. The machinery hummed around them. Somewhere in the distance, someone was hammering on metal. The sounds of the working district were so different from the elegant music playing at the summit above. Then Tyler shook his head slowly. That's messed up, he said bluntly. Like, really messed up. On Earth, we don't marry people because they'll live a long time. We marry them because we love them. Because we want to spend our lives with them. However long that life is. Lyria blinked at him. Love. The word felt strange in her mouth in this context. Marriage isn't about love. It's about alliances. Power. Combining resources. Creating legacy through offspring. Love is just a bonus if you're lucky. That sounds terrible, Tyler said with complete honesty. He pulled a stained rag from his coverall pocket and wiped some fresh grease off his hands. It didn't help much. What's the point of spending your life with someone if you don't even like them? If you can't laugh with them or talk to them or just enjoy being around them? The point is strengthening your empire, Lyria said, repeating what she'd been taught since childhood. Marriage is a political tool. A way to forge bonds between worlds. Personal feelings are secondary to the greater good. Tyler made a face like he'd tasted something sour. Yeah, that's definitely terrible. No wonder you were crying in an alley. He stretched his legs out in front of him, his work boots scuffed and worn. Look, I don't know anything about galactic politics or empire building or whatever. But I know about being human. And humans figured out a long time ago that 20 years with someone who makes you happy beats 200 years with someone who doesn't. Lyria studied him. He wasn't particularly handsome by any species standards. Average height for a human. Normal build. His face was pleasant but unmemorable. He had kind eyes and calloused hands and an honest way of speaking that was completely foreign to diplomatic circles. You really believe that? She asked. That time doesn't matter as much as happiness. I know it, Tyler said firmly. My grandparents were married for 52 years before my grandfather died. My grandmother said those 52 years were better than any life she could have imagined without him. She missed him every day after, but she never regretted a single moment. Not one. He looked up at the distant lights of the summit levels above. Meanwhile, I've met couples who've been together for decades and are miserable. They stay together for reasons that have nothing to do with actually wanting to be together. That's not living. That's just existing. They talked for hours. Tyler told her about Earth. About growing up in a small town where everyone knew everyone. About deciding to become a mechanic because he liked fixing things, making broken stuff work again. About leaving home to work on stations across the galaxy, sending money back to his family, hoping to save enough to eventually start his own business. He told her about his sister's wedding where his brother-in-law had cried during the vows because he was so happy. About his parents who still held hands after 30 years together. About his friend Danny who'd married someone his family disapproved of and was happier than he'd ever been. Lyria found herself laughing at his stories. Actually laughing. When was the last time she'd done that? Tyler had a way of describing things that made ordinary moments sound magical. A broken engine that started working again. A perfectly made sandwich after a 14-hour shift. The view of a planet's sunrise from a repair platform. He made her forget, for a little while, about marriage summits and political alliances and the weight of being a princess nobody wanted. What about you? Tyler asked as the station's artificial dawn began brightening the sky above. If you could marry anyone, politics aside, what would you want? Lyria thought about it. Really thought about it for the first time in years. Someone who chose me, she said quietly. Not my empire. Not my resources. Not some political advantage. Just me. Someone who'd look at me and think, yes, this person, this is who I want to spend my time with. That doesn't seem like too much to ask, Tyler said. In my world, it's everything, Lyria replied. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. The mechanical district was waking up around them. Other workers were arriving for their shifts. The sounds of industry were picking up. Soon Tyler would need to start his own workday. Lyria should return to the summit. Her guards were probably searching for her. Her father would be worried. There would be consequences for disappearing like she had. But she didn't want to move. Didn't want this moment to end. This strange, unexpected moment of honest conversation with someone who saw her as just a person. Tyler stood and offered her a hand up. His grip was strong and warm. You should probably get back before someone sends a search party, he said with a slight smile. But for what it's worth, I think those people at your summit are idiots. Why? Lyria asked, standing and trying to brush dirt off her expensive gown. Because they're so focused on lifespans and politics that they can't see what actually matters. Tyler looked at her seriously. You seem like a good person. You're smart. You're kind. You can laugh even after crying your heart out. That's worth more than an extra 100 years of life. Lyria felt something shift inside her chest. Something she couldn't quite name. Thank you, she said softly. For listening. For not judging. For just being kind. Anytime, Tyler said. Then he hesitated, like he was debating whether to say something. Finally, he pulled a small data chip from his pocket and held it out. This has my code on it. If you ever need someone to talk to who doesn't care about politics or alliances or any of that stuff, you can reach me. Lyria took the chip, her fingers closing around it carefully. Tyler shifted his weight, then said something that stopped Lyria's world completely. And if you ever want to marry someone who doesn't care about alliances or how long you'll live, let me know. I'd marry you. Lyria stared at Tyler in complete shock. The data chip with his code felt suddenly heavy in her hand. Around them, the mechanical district was coming fully to life with workers arriving for their shifts, but all she could hear was those impossible words echoing in her mind. I'd marry you. You're joking, she finally managed to say. Her voice came out as barely a whisper. Tyler's face was completely serious. No hint of amusement or mockery. I'm not joking. You seem like a good person who's been treated badly. If you want out of that life, I'll help. No expectations. No strings. Just an offer. He gestured toward the data chip. Think about it. No pressure. But the offer stands. Then he walked away, back toward his workshop, leaving Lyria standing alone in that alley holding a chip and feeling like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. She returned to the summit in a daze. Her guards found her and escorted her back with worried expressions but no questions. Her father looked relieved to see her but didn't ask where she'd gone. They both knew another summit had ended in failure. What was there to say? For 3 days, Lyria carried that chip everywhere. She'd pull it out and stare at it during quiet moments. She told herself to throw it away. To forget the strange human mechanic who'd said impossible things in a dirty alley. It was absurd. A human couldn't marry a Calthene princess. Her father would never allow it. The Empire would be scandalized. It was completely, utterly impossible. But it was also the first genuine offer she'd had in 5 years. On the 4th day, her hands shaking, Lyria loaded the com code and sent a message, "I want to accept your offer. But you need to understand what you're agreeing to. Meet me tonight. Same place. Same time." Tyler's response came back within minutes, "I'll be there." That night, Lyria wore a disguise. Simple clothing borrowed from a servant. A hood to hide her distinctive Calthene features. She snuck out of her quarters like a criminal and made her way back to the mechanical district, to that same alley where everything had changed. Tyler was already waiting. He looked nervous. Excited. Maybe a little scared. "You came," Lyria said. "You asked me to," Tyler replied simply. They sat down, and Lyria explained everything. Really everything this time. If they married, Tyler wouldn't just be marrying her. He'd become prince consort of the Calthene Empire. He'd be thrust into a world of galactic politics he knew nothing about. Diplomats and nobles would scrutinize his every move. Some would hate him for being human. Others would see him as someone taking advantage of a desperate princess. "The press will tear you apart," Lyria warned. "They'll say you're after wealth or power. They'll question your motives constantly. Your entire life will become public property. Every decision analyzed. Every mistake magnified." Tyler listened quietly, his expression thoughtful. "And there's the lifespan issue," Lyria continued, her voice dropping. "I have maybe 20 years left. 25 if I'm lucky. You're what, 26? 27? You'll still be young when I die. You'll have to live with that loss for decades. Maybe centuries if human medical technology keeps advancing." She met his eyes. "That's not fair to you. That's not fair to ask of anyone." The alley was quiet except for the distant hum of machinery. Above them, ships came and went from the station's docking ports, their engines creating brief moments of louder sound before fading. "I've thought about it," Tyler finally said. "A lot actually. Couldn't sleep much the last few days just thinking." He rubbed the back of his neck. "Here's what I figured out. Everyone dies eventually. My grandfather got 82 years. One of my cousins died in an accident at 19. My aunt has some genetic condition and probably won't make it past 50. He looked directly at Lyria. "Some people get 80 years. Some get 40. That doesn't make the time less valuable. It doesn't make the relationships less real." He reached out and took her hand. His palm was warm and rough with calluses. "If you really want this, I'm in," Tyler said firmly. "Not for politics. Not for status. Not for whatever wealth comes with being a prince. Just because you deserve someone who chooses you. Someone who sees you as more than a lifespan calculation. You deserve to be happy, Lyria. Even if it's only for 20 years. Lyria felt tears starting to form. "You're insane. You know that, right? This is the most impractical, illogical decision you could possibly make." "Yeah, probably," Tyler admitted with a slight smile. "But humans are pretty good at making impractical decisions when it comes to people we care about. It's kind of our thing." 2 weeks later, they traveled to the Calthene homeworld. The planet was beautiful, with purple skies and twin suns that created perpetual golden hour lighting. The capital city sparkled with architecture that seemed to defy gravity, buildings that spiraled upward like frozen tornadoes of crystal and metal. The imperial palace sat at the city's heart. It was ancient, built thousands of years ago when the Calthene were still learning to travel between stars. Every emperor had added to it, creating a massive structure that was part fortress, part museum, part seat of government. Tyler stared up at it as their transport landed. "That's where you grew up?" "That's home," Lyria confirmed. She could see his nervousness returning. "It's going to be okay. My father is intimidating, but he's fair." They were escorted through hallways lined with portraits of past emperors. Lyria's ancestors stared down at them from the walls, their painted eyes seeming to judge this human who dared to pursue their descendant. Guards flanked them on both sides, their weapons visible but not drawn. A formal procession for a formal occasion. The throne room was designed to intimidate. It was huge, with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadows. The throne itself sat on a raised platform at the far end, requiring visitors to walk a long distance under scrutiny before reaching it. Every step echoed. Emperor Van sat waiting. He was massive even by Calthene standards, his presence filling the space around him. Years of ruling an empire showed in every line of his face, every calculated movement. He wore the traditional robes of his office, deep purple with gold threading that caught the light. Lyria could feel Tyler trembling slightly beside her. She didn't blame him. Her father had a way of making even experienced diplomats feel small. They reached the base of the platform. Lyria bowed formally. Tyler followed her lead, though his bow was awkward and unpracticed. "Father," Lyria said clearly, "I present Tyler Brooks of Earth. He comes to formally request my hand in marriage." The throne room fell completely silent. The guards shifted. Court officials whispered to each other. This was unprecedented. A human? Requesting marriage to the princess? The scandal of it rippled through the room like a wave. Emperor Van leaned forward, his eyes locked on Tyler. When he spoke, his voice was deep and carried the weight of authority. "You understand," Van said slowly, "that my daughter has perhaps 20 years remaining? 25 at most? You are human. You could live a century or more. You would spend most of your life without her." "Yes, Your Majesty," Tyler said. His voice shook slightly but held steady. "I understand. And you believe you can handle being a prince consort? Learning our culture? Living in a world completely foreign to you? Being judged constantly by those who think you unworthy?" "I'm willing to try, sir." "Why?" The question cut through the room like a blade. "Why would you choose this? What do you gain?" Tyler swallowed hard. Lyria could see him gathering his courage. When he spoke, his voice was stronger. "I don't gain anything, Your Majesty. Not really. But your daughter gains someone who chooses her for herself. Not for alliances or resources or political advantage. Just her. That seems worth any difficulty." Emperor Van stared at Tyler for what felt like an eternity. The silence stretched so long that Lyria thought she might scream just to break it. Finally, her father spoke. "You may marry. But first, you must complete the integration. 1 month living among our people. Learning our ways. Proving you can adapt to our culture and lifestyle." His eyes hardened. "Most who attempt the integration fail. It is designed to be difficult. To test resolve. Do you accept these terms?" Tyler didn't hesitate. "Yes, Your Majesty. I accept." The integration month was the hardest thing Tyler had ever done. He was placed in a small room in the servants' quarters of the palace. Not the luxurious guest chambers where visiting dignitaries stayed. A simple room with a bed, a desk, and a window that looked out over the city. He was treated exactly like every other palace worker. Expected to wake early. Work hard. Learn fast. Calthene culture was overwhelming. Everything moved at a different pace because time meant something different when you only had 40 years to live. Decisions were made quickly. Celebrations were intense and frequent. Grief was expressed openly and without shame. Every moment was treated as precious because moments actually were precious when you had fewer of them. Tyler studied their language for hours every day. The written form used symbols that represented entire concepts rather than individual sounds. He practiced until his hand cramped from writing. He learned their history, their customs, their religious beliefs. He attended formal dinners where he had to remember which utensil to use for which course and which topics were appropriate for discussion. The court watched him constantly. Nobles would accidentally encounter him in hallways and ask pointed questions, testing his knowledge. Servants reported on his behavior. Everything he did was analyzed and judged. Halfway through the month, Tyler sat in his room feeling completely overwhelmed. His head hurt from trying to absorb too much information too fast. His body was exhausted from the physical demands of palace life. His heart ached from missing the simple, uncomplicated life he'd left behind. He stared at the comm device on his desk. One message and he could leave. Go back to fixing engines. Go back to his tiny apartment and simple existence. No one would blame him for quitting. Everyone expected him to quit. A knock on his door interrupted his thoughts. Lyria stood in the hallway, wearing simple clothing like his. She'd been forbidden from seeing him during the integration except for scheduled supervised visits, but she'd snuck out anyway. "You're thinking about leaving," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Tyler couldn't lie to her. "Yeah, I am." Lyria stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. "You can leave. I won't blame you. This is hard. Harder than I warned you it would be." She sat on the edge of his bed, her hands folded in her lap. "Loving someone with a short life means guaranteed pain. Sometimes I hate my own biology. Hate that I'm asking you to sign up for something that will hurt you." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside the window, the city lights sparkled. Somewhere out there, people were living their lives. Making their own choices. Fighting their own battles. "My grandfather," Tyler said slowly, told me something before he died. He said that life isn't measured in years. It's measured in moments that matter. Moments when you feel truly alive. He looked at Lyria. I felt more alive in the past few weeks with you than I did in years of just going through the motions back home. That doesn't mean you have to stay, Lyria said. That doesn't mean you have to sacrifice your future for 20 years with me. It's not a sacrifice if I'm choosing it, Tyler replied. Everyone faces loss eventually. My parents will die someday. My sister. My friends. Everyone I know. That's just life. The question isn't whether I'll hurt. The question is whether loving you is worth that eventual pain. And is it? Lyria's voice was barely a whisper. Tyler reached over and took her hand. Yeah. It is. He stayed. He finished the integration. And when the final test came, when he stood before judges and explained why he was worthy to marry a Calthene princess, his answer was simple and honest. He wasn't worthy by their standards. But he'd make Lyria happy. That had to count for something. Emperor Van approved. The wedding was scheduled. And then the real chaos began. News of the marriage spread across the galaxy faster than light speed. Communication networks lit up with the story. An alien princess marrying a human mechanic. It had everything: romance, scandal, political implications, and a challenge to established social order. Reactions were fierce and divided. Some species saw it as a beautiful love story. A human choosing connection over calculation. A princess finding someone who valued her for herself. Romantic broadcasts played up the fairy tale angle. Mechanic wins princess's heart. Love conquers status divide. Others called it a scandal. A desperate princess lowering herself to marry a nobody. A human taking advantage of royal desperation for social climbing. Conservative nobles across the galaxy expressed outrage. This sets a dangerous precedent. What's next? Janitors marrying emperors. The nobles who'd rejected Lyria at those 5 marriage summits suddenly changed their tune. They gave interviews claiming they'd always supported her. We knew she'd find someone eventually. Such a brave choice she made. The hypocrisy was stunning but not surprising. 3 days before the wedding, Tyler was approached by an ambassador from the Valyrian Empire. The man cornered him in a palace hallway with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Tyler Brooks, the ambassador said smoothly. I represent certain parties who are concerned about your upcoming marriage. Would like to offer you an alternative. He pulled out a data chip. This contains access to an account with enough credits to set you up for life. By your own repair company. Multiple locations. Never have to work another day if you don't want to. In exchange for what? Tyler asked, though he already knew. Walk away. Call off the wedding. Quietly disappear. The ambassador's smile widened. No one blames you. This was all moving too fast anyway. Take the money. Go live your life. Everyone wins. Tyler looked at the data chip for a long moment. That much money could change everything. He could buy his parents a house. Send his sister's kids to the best schools. Set up his entire family for generations. He looked back at the ambassador. No. The smile vanished. You're making a mistake. You're a mechanic. She's a princess. This will never work. You'll be miserable in a world you don't understand. Maybe, Tyler said. But that's my choice to make. The bribes kept coming. Different ambassadors. Different offers. Each one larger than the last. When bribes failed, threats started. Warnings that he was making powerful enemies. That his family back on Earth might face consequences. That accidents could happen to humans who overreached their station. The pressure was enormous and constant. Tyler barely slept. Every shadow seemed to hide another diplomat with another offer or threat. Every message on his comm device made his stomach clench. Lyria faced her own pressure. Nobles cornered her at formal events. Are you certain about this, human? It's not too late to change your mind. Think of the Empire's reputation. Her father received formal complaints from other royal houses. Some threatened to withdraw trade agreements. Others suggested the marriage would weaken the Calthene Empire's standing. The night before the wedding, Lyria lay in her chambers unable to sleep. She kept expecting a message from Tyler. An apology. An explanation of why he couldn't go through with it. She'd prepared herself for rejection so many times before. This would just be one more, wouldn't it? She'd even drafted a statement she'd read if he backed out. Dignified. Understanding. Claiming it was a mutual decision. Protecting them both from scandal. Around midnight, her comm device blinked. A message from Tyler, "Can we meet? Private garden. Now." Lyria's heart sank. This was it. The rejection she'd been preparing for. She dressed quickly and made her way through dark hallways to the palace's private garden. The space was beautiful at night, with bioluminescent plants casting soft blue and green light across the pathways. Tyler waited by a fountain. He looked exhausted. Stressed. Like he'd aged years in the past few weeks. "Hey," he said quietly when she appeared. "You want to call it off," Lyria said. Not a question. A statement. Preparing herself for the blow. "What? No." Tyler looked genuinely confused. "Why would you think that?" "Because everyone wants you to. Because the pressure must be unbearable. Because this is insane and you'd have every right to walk away." The words tumbled out of Lyria in a rush. "I've been preparing myself all day for you to change your mind. It's okay if you do. I understand. This is too much to ask of anyone." Tyler stepped closer. "I'm not walking away. I just wanted to see you before tomorrow. To make sure you were okay. To make sure you still wanted this." Lyria stared at him. "You asking if I still want this? You're the one being offered fortunes to leave. You're the one being threatened. You're the one giving up your entire life." "We're both probably crazy," Tyler admitted with a tired smile. "This is insane. We barely know each other. We're from different worlds literally. The whole galaxy thinks we're making a mistake." "Yeah," Lyria agreed softly. "But I'd rather be crazy with you than sensible and alone," Tyler finished. He took her hands in his. "Tomorrow, if you still want to do this, I'll be there. No doubts. No regrets. Just me choosing you." Lyria felt tears forming. Happy tears this time. "I'll be there too." They stood in that garden until dawn, just holding hands and talking quietly. About their fears. About their hopes. About the life they tried to build together despite everything working against them. When the first sun began rising, Tyler headed back to his quarters to prepare. In a few hours, they'd either go through with the most controversial wedding in recent galactic history, or everything would fall apart. But for the first time in years, Lyria felt something she'd almost forgotten. Hope. The wedding ceremony combined traditions from both their worlds. The palace's grand hall had been transformed into something that was part Calthene elegance and part human simplicity. Flowers from Earth mixed with bioluminescent plants from the Calthene homeworld. Traditional Calthene ceremonial drapes hung alongside simple white fabric that reminded Tyler of weddings back home. Thousands attended in person. Billions more watched via broadcast across the galaxy. This wasn't just a wedding anymore. It had become a statement. A challenge to how things had always been done. When Tyler walked down the aisle, he wore formal Calthene ceremonial robes that he'd spent weeks learning how to put on properly. They were uncomfortable and he felt ridiculous, but he wore them because it mattered to Lyria's people. When Lyria appeared, she wore a white dress in human style, simple and elegant, because it mattered to Tyler. The officiant began the ceremony. Traditional Calthene vows about honor and duty and empire. Then human vows about love and partnership and choosing each other every day. The mixing of cultures felt awkward at first, but somehow it worked. Two different worlds trying to meet in the middle. When the officiant asked if anyone objected, several nobles stood. Tyler's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment everything could fall apart. But before any of them could speak, Tyler turned to address the crowd himself. His voice carried across the hall, amplified by technology but powered by conviction. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "I'm nobody. Just a human mechanic. This marriage makes no political sense. You're right. But I'm not here for politics. I'm not here for status or wealth or power." He looked at Lyria. "I'm here because she deserves someone who chooses her. Not her empire. Not her resources. Just her." The nobles who'd stood slowly sat back down. What could they say to that? How could they argue against someone who genuinely wanted to make another person happy? When it came time for their vows, Lyria's voice shook but held strong. "For 5 years, I believed no one would ever want me. That my biology made me worthless. That I was just a bad investment no one would make." She looked at Tyler with tears in her eyes. "You showed me that time doesn't measure worth. That love does. I may only have 20 years left, but I'll spend them happy. That's more than I ever dreamed possible." Tyler's vows were simpler. "I promise to make every day count. To make you laugh. To stand beside you. To choose you every single day, however many days we get." They married. The hall erupted in mixed reactions. Some cheered. Others sat in stunned silence. But it didn't matter anymore. They'd made their choice. Emperor Van stood and made his own announcement. Any species that wanted to maintain trade relations with the Calthene Empire must respect this marriage. It was a power move that forced the galaxy to accept what had happened whether they liked it or not. The news reached Earth within hours. Across human worlds and colonies, people celebrated. A mechanic had married a princess. A regular person had stood up to an entire empire's worth of prejudice and won. It became a symbol. Proof that humans valued connection over status. Love over logic. That sometimes the impractical choice was the right choice. 5 years passed. Tyler and Lyria built a life together that defied everyone's expectations. They traveled across the galaxy, visiting worlds both had never seen. They worked together on projects that mattered to them. And slowly, carefully, they changed things. Lyria started a foundation focused on species with shorter lifespans. There were dozens of them scattered across the galaxy. Species who lived 30 years, 50 years, 80 years. All of them facing the same prejudices the Calthene did. All of them treated as lesser because their time was limited. The Foundation worked to change attitudes. It funded research. It created support networks. It challenged laws that discriminated based on lifespan. It proved that worth wasn't measured in years but in impact. In what you did with the time you had. Tyler used his engineering background differently now. He worked with medical researchers developing technology specifically for the Calthene. They couldn't extend lives. The biology was too fundamental to change. But they could improve quality of life. Better health monitoring systems that caught problems early. Pain management technology that made decline easier. Comfort measures for final years. The work was hard and progress was slow. Changing galactic attitudes that had existed for millennia didn't happen overnight. But it happened. Little by little. Planet by planet. Species by species. Other short-lived species started speaking up. Sharing their stories. Demanding respect. The Foundation grew. What started as Lyria's personal project became a movement. Another marriage summit arrived. 5 years after Tyler and Lyria's wedding. The event was held on Velthra Prime again, in that same sparkling ballroom where Lyria had once stood invisible and unwanted. But she wasn't invisible anymore. She and Tyler attended as special guests. As they walked through the hall, people stared. Not with pity or judgment. With curiosity. With respect. Some even approached to thank them for what they'd started. On the balcony outside, a young Calthene princess stood nervously. Her name was Kira. She was 19 years old with her whole short life ahead of her. She'd heard stories about Princess Lyria. About the human who'd chosen her. About how things had changed. But standing there watching the mingling crowds inside, Kira still felt afraid. Still felt that old fear that no one would want someone who'd only be around for 20 years. Then something happened that would have been impossible 5 years ago. A Grundan prince approached her. Then a Vailian diplomat. Then a scholar from the Aerith. All of them interested. All of them asking questions. All of them looking past her lifespan to see her as a person. Lyria and Tyler watched from inside the hall. They could see Kira's shocked expression. Could see the moment she realized she wasn't being rejected. That she had options. That she was wanted. "Do you think she'll find someone?" Tyler asked, squeezing Lyria's hand. "I think she has a better chance than I ever did," Lyria replied with a smile. They walked out to the same balcony where they'd first met in that alley below. 5 years ago, Lyria had stood here crying. Believing no one would ever want her. Now she stood here happily married, watching the next generation face fewer barriers. The view was the same. The 3 moons rising in perfect alignment. The city lights sparkling below. But everything else had changed. "Do you regret it?" Lyria asked quietly. Knowing how this ends. They both knew she was referring to her lifespan. She had maybe 15 years left now. Maybe 20 if she was lucky. Tyler would outlive her by decades. Would face that loss while still relatively young. Would carry that grief for the rest of his long life. Tyler pulled her close. "I regret nothing. Every species in the galaxy is obsessed with living forever. With accumulating more years. More time." He turned to look at her fully. "Humans figured out something better a long time ago. It's not about living forever. It's about living well. With people who matter. Making the time count." "I matter?" Lyria asked with a slight smile. She knew the answer but wanted to hear it anyway. "You matter more than anything," Tyler said firmly. "These 5 years with you have been better than any alternative I could have chosen. And the next 15 will be too." However long we get, it'll be worth it. Down in the mechanical district below, a young human woman finished her shift at a repair shop. Her name was Beth and she'd arrived on the station 3 months ago. She was struggling. Work was hard. Money was tight. She was questioning whether leaving Earth had been a mistake. Then she saw a news broadcast on a public screen. A feature about Tyler Brooks and Princess Lyria. About their 5th wedding anniversary. About the foundation they'd built. About how a mechanic from Earth had married alien royalty and changed galactic society. Beth stared at that screen for a long time. Tyler had been just like her. A regular person doing regular work. But he'd found something that mattered. Someone who mattered. And he'd chosen connection over convenience. She returned to her tiny apartment feeling different. Inspired maybe. If a mechanic could marry a princess and change the galaxy, then maybe there was hope for all of them. Maybe being human meant something more than just fixing engines and scraping by. Tyler and Lyria continued their work for the next decade. The foundation expanded. Medical technology improved. Attitudes shifted. It wasn't perfect. Prejudice didn't disappear overnight. But it got better. When Lyria turned 35, they knew time was getting shorter. The decline that came for all Calthene was starting. Small things at first. Tiring more easily. Needing more rest. But it was coming. They didn't waste time being sad about it. Instead, they doubled down on living. They visited places they'd always wanted to see. They spent time with people they loved. They worked on projects that would outlast Lyria's lifespan. Tyler commissioned a memorial garden on the Calthene homeworld. Not for Lyria specifically, but for all Calthene. A place that celebrated their species. That honored what they'd achieved in their short lives. That reminded the galaxy that length of life didn't equal value of life. The garden would have sections for different eras of Calthene history. Plaques with names of Calthene who'd made significant contributions. Art installations. Places for families to gather and remember. It would take years to complete, but it would stand for centuries. On their 10th anniversary, Tyler and Lyria returned to that alley where they'd first met. It looked exactly the same. Same dirty walls. Same smell of oil and machinery. Same sounds of the working district humming around them. Hard to believe it started here, Lyria said, looking around. Best decision I ever made, Tyler replied. Sitting down to talk to a crying stranger in an alley. Best decision I ever made was crying in that specific alley, Lyria laughed. They sat on the ground like they had that first night. Just 2 people talking. Not a princess and a prince consort. Not founders of an important foundation. Just Tyler and Lyria. Thank you, Lyria said quietly. For choosing me. For proving everyone wrong. For making these years happy. Thank you for letting me, Tyler replied. For taking a chance on a random mechanic. For teaching me what really matters. Above them, ships came and went from the station's docking ports. The galaxy kept spinning. Time kept moving forward. But in that moment, in that dirty alley, they were exactly where they needed to be. Together. Happy. Making every moment count. That's all anyone could really ask for.